Let's bring into the discussion former NATO Ambassador Kurt Volker. So it has been an incredible week. I mean, President Trump laid down those demands on Monday, as Rich was just saying. And already Hamas is saying that it will agree to his demands, although, as usual, they're being a little cagey. What do you think about what has happened? Are they serious about releasing the hostages?
Yeah, well, thanks, John. And it really is quite remarkable. I think President Trump is on to one very big idea, which is very important. That is, there's not going to be a two-state solution, and there's not going to be a one-state solution. So you got to come up with something else. And the something else has got to have economic development at its core and support from countries in the region, particularly the Gulf states. That is what he has put on the table, and that is really a game changer in terms of how this is playing out. This is now putting significant pressure on Hamas to finally give up the war, give up trying to destroy Israel, because it is standing in the way of peace and standing in the way of economic development for the Palestinian people. So this is now putting tremendous pressure on them, not just from Israel and the United States, but from Gulf Arab states as well. And I hope that these negotiations that we're going into now will keep that pressure on and force Hamas to comply. If not, I'm afraid that we do go back to more attacks in Gaza, which no one really wants to see.
Hugh Dugan was the former acting special envoy for hostage negotiations under the Trump administration. He says there are a lot of questions about whether Hamas really can deliver here. Listen to this, and then I want to get your reaction.
Well, can Hamas agree in principle versus can they deliver and implement? Do they have that much control over every single hostage that's being held right now? Will they be able to deliver? Is the fog of war going to be their excuse not to be as swift as possible? I hope we can stick to that deadline.
I have never heard a question about whether or not Hamas controls every single hostage. Do they or do they not?
Well, I've heard that before, that they took the hostages and then they farmed them out to people to keep them. And they may not have full control over all of that. That being said, Hamas has the opportunity here to come clean, to open up, return everyone that they can, to relinquish power. And if there are a few cases where they cannot get back the hostages that they took, they can tell that to the U.S. and the Israelis and others, and that will enable other force and other pressure to bear on those Palestinians who are holding the hostages to give them up. So I don't think that that is effective as an excuse, even if it is something that Hamas may try.
Aaron Cohen is a special operations veteran from the IDF. He says that he thinks this is a kind of a bait and switch operation by Hamas. Listen.
I feel like the release of the hostages is typical signaling and dangling for Hamas. They're not agreeing to disarmament. And so that's the problem I have with this. And I think Hamas is trying to look reasonable for the cameras right now, and they're going to dangle the hostages because that wins the sympathy, which is what they've been a master at manipulating.
They have kept these people hostage for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And the world, I don't know, so much of the world seems to be siding with Hamas. It astounds me, but they have managed to manipulate public opinion.
They have. And, to be fair, the number of civilian casualties and civilian dislocation in Gaza, which Hamas is partly responsible for because they've used them as human shields and they've embedded themselves in a civilian population. But the images that people have seen of that have turned people against Israel, which is very unfortunate because the real root of the issue is the Hamas terrorism and the Hamas attacks from October of 2 years ago. Now, that being said, I think Cohen is right that Hamas will try to continue to play the hostage game, say they'll release them and not actually do so, not actually agree to disarm and lose power. But as I said at the opening here, I think that they are facing a different situation now with the proposal that President Trump has put on the table, which has garnered support from everyone in the region except Hamas.
Very quickly, it is said that the only thing that gets respect in the Middle East is power. And President Trump was pretty threatening in that statement that he made. You think that that had a lot to do with Hamas at least attempting or at least appearing to come around?
Well, I think that's a part of it. I think the U.S. commitment and resolve and willingness to show strength is a key part of that. I also think getting the Gulf Arab states on board with the same program. So we now have Israel, Gulf Arab states, the United States all lined up on one side and Hamas on the other. That's a losing position for Hamas.
Yeah, that in of itself is quite an accomplishment. Ambassador Kurt Volker, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain podcast for full episodes right now.